All right. Good deal. I just had to hit a button. Okay, we're in Exodus chapter 21, and we've been studying through Exodus for a long time now. I don't actually know how long we've been in Exodus. We started in Genesis. We went kind of slowly through Genesis, and then we picked up a lot of speed at the end. And now then we've been going kind of slowly through Exodus, almost verse by verse. But tonight we're not going to go verse by verse. We're going to give a general overview of a big section, Exodus chapter 21 through about 23, maybe middle of 23. Where we are at this point, people were in slavery at the beginning of the book of Exodus. God brought them out by the help of Moses, led them into the wilderness. The people saw the miracles, and they saw the Red Sea parted. They saw God bring the manna in the wilderness, even though they were grumbling. And so now we see God gives them his law. God comes down on the mountain in the presence of the people. He speaks the 10 Commandments to the people. And what is the people's reaction when the people hear God speaking the 10 Commandments to them? They were afraid, right? And what did the people ask Moses to tell God to do? Right. They said, don't let God talk to us anymore. You go talk to God. So they didn't want to hear the voice of God. And Moses says, don't fear God, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. But the people insisted, so verse 21 of chapter 20, and this is going to set the setting for where we are, the people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. And that gives us the setting for where we are in chapter 21. So now God is going to give the law to Moses. Here we see God sets up a system of governing justice for the people who are in the wilderness. A system of governing justice for the people in the wilderness. Take a look at chapter 21, verse 1. Chapter 21 of Exodus, verse 1. It says this, now these are the rules that you shall set before them. Now, who's speaking here? God is speaking. And to whom is God speaking? Moses. And who is the them that Moses is setting before? The people. Right. Okay, just so we know what we're doing, we know what we're reading. These are the rules that you should set before them. So these are the rules that Moses is to bring back to the people, to set before the people, the rules of God. So there's two ideas. We're going to look at some of these individual rules. So the next two chapters are going to be rule. There's a lot of content. If we tried to go verse by verse, it would take us about as long as it took us to get through the 10 Commandments. Now, the 10 Commandments were really foundational, which is why we took the time to go one by one. These rules are going to expand on our understanding of the 10 Commandments. Okay? So things like do not murder, do not bear false witness, do not covet, do not steal. All of the 10 Commandments, honor your father and mother, have no other gods before me, have no idols. These are all commandments. I think that was, 7? Somebody tell me which 3 I missed. No adultery. Right, that's absolutely there. Graven image. I already said that one, I thought. Don't covet. Keep the Sabbath holy. That's right. I think I got them all. So all of those are now going to be expounded into really specific things. And we're going to see, each time we see one of these rules, one of these laws, we're going to see two elements. One is crime, and the other is the punishment. One is the crime, and the other is the punishment. I think we kind of understand that idea. If you go into, if you're ever sentenced for a crime or convicted of a crime in a court, there's two phases, right? First is the conviction, right? We go through the trial to see if you're actually convicted of the crime. The second is the sentencing. What is the sentence that's going to be handed down as the punishment for your crime? So we have the crime on one hand, we have the punishment on the other. And this is going to really help us when we start to read these, because the temptation is to say, okay, here's the rules of God, so we should probably copy and paste this into our own lives. The problem isn't so much when we try and say, let's not do these crimes. That's absolutely relevant for our life. Do not do these crimes. The problem is when we get into trying and applying these punishments for ourselves, right? We're going to get into why in a bit, but these punishments were for the Israelites who were in the wilderness at the time. The crime defines what the sin is. And the punishment is the method of seeking justice and restoration or restitution. In a sense, the punishment is a setting up of a type of, I won't say the answer. So, what group gets to decide punishments for crimes? Judges? Who else? What judges are a part of what system? Government, right. And anytime the government designs a form or a service to help someone, it tends to be pretty terrible. But what governments are good at are setting up rules and laws. And governments, in that sense, for that purpose, are a good thing. So what God is doing here for the Israelites is setting up for them a system of government, right? Here's the crimes, not just the crimes. We saw crimes in the Ten Commandments, right? Thou shalt not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You should not steal. We don't see what the punishments are yet, okay? So if someone murders, what do we do? Someone steals, what do we do? Someone commits adultery, what do we do? We got the crimes, we know what the sins are, and now we can see the punishment. So, again, at this time, the Israelites are in the wilderness. They are not under another government, okay? They used to be under the government of Egypt, and they're not under a government at the moment, right? They don't have laws to govern themselves at the moment, and God is giving them these for them. So how do we treat governments and laws as a people of God? Because living today, I think everyone in here is American. I don't think we have any other citizenships in here, but we all live in 2024 in America and not in the wilderness, not under the rule of God in the wilderness under Moses. How do we apply some of this today? Let's look at that, and then we'll get into some of the specifics about these laws. Look with me at Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 7. Some of you might have already had this in mind, because this helps us think about how do we treat governments as a people. I think it was last summer we went through our series of tough questions. We let people submit questions, and some of the questions had to do with how do we treat governments as a Christian? You know, how do we see our place as a Christian inside of a government, specifically the American government? So let's look in Romans 13, verse 1. It says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from whom? God. And those that exist are instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed. And those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror, to good conduct, but to bad. to good conduct, excuse me. They're not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you not fear for the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is whose servant? God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath in wrongdoing. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes is owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. So if we find ourselves under a government with godly laws, even if the godly laws are just a few, then we follow those godly laws and we are subject to the government that we're underneath. Even bad governments still offer their people some sort of protection, right? Which is a tough thing to think about, but even bad governments which refuse to acknowledge God as supreme and acknowledge God in their actions, they still, in a general sense, keep their people safe. And so, in a general sense, having government is a good thing. And in Romans tells us that governments are instituted by God. Even if they don't recognize it, even if they fight against God, they are still, in some sense, instituted by God, and we are to be subject to them. So if we're supposed to be subject to a government that's been placed over us, or that we happen to find ourselves in, how does that mesh with what we're reading in the book of Exodus? Well, we are not the people in the book of Exodus, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to read about crimes, we're going to read about punishments. The crimes are going to show us the nature of sin. And we are going to say, we're going to take that and say, this is the heart of God. We're going to read these crimes, we're going to avoid them, and understand God's heart. We can say these were the punishments at the time. The punishments show us the severity of the crime, but we aren't necessarily going to institute those punishments here and now. Maybe we have a similar punishment in our laws. Maybe we have a different punishment. Maybe it's the punishment that the government that we're under has isn't an evil punishment, so we can submit to that government in that sense. A good example here. Look at verse 12 of chapter 21 back in Exodus. Look at verse 12. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. All right? So here we have crime, killing somebody, kind of going back to thou shalt not murder, and the punishment, he should be put to death. Now, in verses 13 and 14, we have some qualifications about whether or not it was accidental or not. And if they are accidental, they actually have some refuge. They have a site that they can go so that people's family probably won't hunt them down and kill them, right? But here we have a clear punishment. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. Now, as American readers of this in 2024, we understand, okay, that we have other options in our governmental system than simply saying everyone who commits murder is going to be put to the death penalty. We have, what's one thing that we have in our justice system that would not be available to the people of Israel in the wilderness? What's a big institution that gets a lot of criticism? That's right, prisons. That's right. The people in the wilderness don't have prisons, okay? They don't have rehab. They don't have, what's the other word that is there in my brain, but it's gone? They don't have probation. They don't have probation officers, okay? that system is not set up. Okay? They definitely, especially, don't have prisons. Okay? So what do you do with people? Well, if the crime is severe enough, the punishment is a severe punishment, right? And we'll see there are crimes which aren't that severe, so the punishment is less severe. So these laws come to us, and we're going to read them. We're going to look at the crime. The punishment's going to help us understand the severity, but we're not necessarily going to say, okay, that's how we need to treat other people. We're definitely not going to take the law into our own hands, right? A good example here, verse 15. Whoever strikes his father or mother shall be put to death. Okay, we're not going to take the law into our own hands and find someone who strikes his mother and father and say, well, I get to kill him now, right? Because I'm following Exodus chapter 21, verse 15. That says I get to kill them. No. That is a punishment specifically for the people in the wilderness who are not underneath another government. These are the rules. This is what God has put there. We live under a different set of government, a different set of rules. It would be wrong for us to go take the law into our own hands and kill someone who has struck their mother or father, right? But we understand striking your mother and father, major crime. Right now, it seems weird for us to hear that that's a major crime deserving of death because we don't live in an honor-shame culture, right? But that's high shame for you to dishonor your father and your mother in that way. That would be a major offense. Something that really we sometimes don't have in our... It doesn't make us as angry as it made them. I'll say it that way. In this day and age, you did not, like, that sort of thing is sort of unspeakable, it's unthinkable. And so putting them to death is a balancing punishment in these days. We would say, oh, if you struck your father and mother, I guess you could press charges for assault if you wanted to. But we don't live in the day and age that they lived in, an honor-shame culture. And honestly, we don't have respect for our parents in our culture, as a culture, not necessarily at our church, but as a culture, we don't have respect for our parents like we really should. In fact, notice that is one of the 10 Commandments, right? And what's the one that comes right after that one in the 10 Commandments? You shall not murder, right? So God takes time before he gets to don't murder someone, honor your father and mother, right? Like it's big. So we take the punishment and we understand the crime. I think I've does anybody have any questions about how that sort of applies to us? And the reason I address this is sometimes you will hear people say, this is the punishment we see in Exodus, and that's the punishment that we need to put in place for these kind of people in today's age, right? Has anybody heard that kind of thing? Like, well, if someone does that, Exodus says we put them to death. That's what we should do, right? Well, I've heard some things like that. And so what I want to do is be really careful to understand these people need laws. They're in the wilderness. They don't have laws, and God is being gracious to give them laws. Now, let's talk about what is a law. The word for law in Exodus is the word that the people will come to refer to the first 5 books of the Bible under this Hebrew name. What is the name for the Jewish scriptures? Anybody know? Torah. That's right. It's the Hebrew word for law, the Torah. So when in Hebrew you hear the word Torah, that means law. Okay? So the idea is here we're beginning to get the Torah, the law of God for the people. This is a grace to God's people. God could have wiped humanity out in the flood. Humanity was wicked, and God could have wiped them out. He did not wipe them out. Here he's called a people to himself. These people has already been disobedient to him, and God is gracious to give them laws. So let's take a look at what sort of laws we see here. First, we're going to see that these laws seek restitution. These laws seek restitution. Take a look at chapter 22, verse 6. Chapter 22, verse 6. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that the stacked grain or the standing grain of the field is consumed, he who started the fire must make what? Full restitution, absolutely. He must make restitution, okay? Now, in an honor and shame culture, you could say, well, you caught my grain on fire, you've shamed me, I'm going to kill you, right? All of my clan, we're going to get together, we're going to hunt you down and kill you, and then we'll have peace, right? Honor shame culture, sort of, kind of, if it's my clan versus your clan, that, and honestly, that's not that strange of an idea to us, because in Mississippi, we kind of have stand your ground laws, and so sometimes you don't want to go trespassing onto the wrong person's property, because what can likely happen to you? You can get shot, right? Now, we're not advocating that someone would shoot somebody, but we do understand that some people do drastic things when they get offended, right? So in this day and age, it wouldn't be out of the question for someone to go hunt someone down and overdo the punishment, okay? So here God is saying, no, we have full restitution and nothing else. It's a grace to these people that God is seeking a balance of restitution. Second point, these laws are radically different than neighboring laws. Go back to chapter 21 and look at verse 2. These laws are radically different than neighboring laws. Verse 2, chapter 21, when you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. Now, let me pause real quick. Does anybody's Bible have a note on the word slave? A note maybe that goes to the bottom. Yeah, what does it say? Servant, right. I do want to make one thing clear. In the Hebrew, there's only one word for servant and slave. There's not like two words like we have in English. There's one word, okay? And in fact, in the Greek, it's the same way. Paul frequently calls himself a servant of Christ or a slave of Christ, okay? Now, a slave is, in the ancient world, owned by their master. But people didn't become slaves simply because of... It wasn't the exact same slavery that, let's say, we saw in the Americas, okay? Anyone really could become a slave. And in fact, some of the laws that you'll see in chapter 21 say if someone doesn't have anything to pay to make full restitution, they can become a servant or a slave for a time to pay that person back. Sort of like if you go to a restaurant and you don't have any money to pay, maybe they'll make you wash dishes. I don't know, I've seen that in movies. I've never actually seen someone do that. They'll probably call the cops on you. But they had, the restaurant has cops to call on you. These people did not. Here, though, the servant, the slave, it's the servant slave is both the property of the master and the responsibility of the master. Okay? And it's weird in our culture to hear, oh, you can own somebody, but it's the clear teaching in chapter 21 is that masters are supposed to be such a good master that the slave can even choose to remain in your household and not go free from you. There's actually a verse that says, if a slave desires to stay with you, he can. And then he's yours for life. If he wants to go free, you let him go. Or if it's time for him to go free and you want to let him go free and he doesn't want to leave. You're supposed to be that sort of master to these people. It's not quite an employer. It's more than that. But you're supposed to have that same responsibility of an employer. So it's not a slavery in a sense of the master gets whatever they want, the slave has no rights, and the slave is just the lowest of the low. It's that the slave has dignity and should be treated as so. In fact, what we just read in verse 2 is that after they serve 6 years, on the 7th, they can go free. That's huge, okay? If you can find an ancient law that has provisions for slaves to go free, I'm happy to hear it, but I don't know of any. Right? This is big. Okay? The people just came out of slavery in Egypt. Their slavery was an evil thing, and God freed them. Here, God has provisions for slaves to be freed. This is like a bombshell type teaching in the ancient world. No one's going to have in their framework of mind the idea that slaves can work to their freedom. Okay? This is major. So here God is even making a restitution that you can pay off your servitude. These are radically different than neighboring laws. Let's look again at chapter 22, verse 16. Chapter 22, verse 16. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. Verse 17. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. All right, so in the ancient world, might is right is sort of the law of the day, right? Like if you steal a woman, I guess she's yours. Here, no. You make restitution, right? If you've stolen her away and you lie with her, you become her husband. Now you have taken upon yourself the responsibility, and you pay the bride price to the father, the price that he would have paid to the groom at the marriage. The groom now has to pay the father of the girl, and here we're bringing restitution. Now, you might say, none of this really sounds like actual justice. None of this sounds like we're really bringing restitution and resolution to the situation. And in some sense, we don't have true justice until we have Jesus on the cross. At that point, we have actual punishment and payment for man's sin, which is why we have the sacrifices. But these laws help us get to a restitution. God's punishments seem harsh, but we have to consider that none of the people who are here deserve to be alive. Okay? And that's also true for us. We don't actually deserve any of the goodness that we've been given. We have been blessed with a lot. We've been blessed with life. We've been blessed with the ability to come here, to sit, to have air conditioning, electricity. We don't deserve any of it. And so these punishments help us answer the question, how can a sinful people stand before a righteous God and still live? How can a sinful people stand in the midst of a righteous God and still live? And so I think these laws are helpful for us to read, even if sometimes they're perplexing. They're helpful for us to read. They're helpful for us to know what is God's heart, what are the crimes, which are the sins which we should avoid, even if we don't apply the punishments to our own situations. And it's difficult for us to hear about slavery. It's difficult for us to hear about the economy of what it means to be a servant and a slave. But I think the idea here is key, is that a slave can become free. And so God is showing us that his laws are radically different than the laws around them at the time. All right, that brings us sort of into the middle of chapter 23. Okay, so we've picked out a few of the specific laws here and there. I encourage you between now and next week, read some of these chapters, read some of these laws, write down your really difficult questions, and then bring them to Brother Cody. And then have him answer all your difficult questions. But before then, does anybody have any questions about any of the stuff we've learned or considered? All right. What time is it? 7:15. Great. They will, yeah. This is great. And Cody's always got like a whole bunch of questions, so I thought I'd get 2 or 3. Read some of these. These are really interesting. Even for just knowing, like, what is daily life for Israelites in the wilderness? What does it look like? A lot of things about oxen. Some of us maybe have cattle, but most of us probably don't. So, yeah. All right. That's basically all I have. Y'all sure you don't have any questions about any of this? Yeah, it seems like that. That
that's the truth. I mean, some don't take care of their children, and so
that's true. Yeah. So.
Some of them abuse them. Some of them don't take care of them. Some of them abuse them sexually.
That's true. We do have unfaithful parents. We do have unfaithful parents, and so.
And why I thought that, I don't know.
Well, no, that brings up a good point, because I think it goes 2 ways. We should honor our parents, which, by the way,
But they should deserve our honor.
right, we should honor them, and they should seek to be worthy of our honor, even though I'm not sure I'm completely worthy of my daughter's honor all the time. But they should seek to honor me, because that's what God commands.
And because you provide for them,
Right.
you take care of them.
Right, but I think even in a situation where the parent is abusive, or where they are failing to be good parents, I think there's still a way for Christians, even Christian children, to honor them even if they're not obeying them. Right? We can be Christians who will...
That would be a strong child.
That would be a strong child, yeah. I think more applies to Christian adults who have parents who are not living a Christian life, but it's still in the 10 Commandments. It doesn't say honor your father and mother if they happen to be following me. Right? It's honor your father and mother. Now, it doesn't mean obey them in everything that they say and do, right? But it makes us think, okay, what would be honoring to God and how I could treat my parents.
But then on the other hand, what would be honoring to God the way the parents treat the child?
Right. And the parents should respond with, how can I raise my children in a way that honors God, right? That commandment's not the only verse about parents and children, right? We have a lot of instruction in the Bible about how we should raise our children to love the Lord. Proverbs is full of teaching us about parents being good, loving parents who raise our children to honor the Lord. Because if we don't, then we risk sending our children off into ungodliness. And in some sense, that's on our hands if we have failed to do our job.
It's a complicated matter.
Yeah. It's complicated, but we have guidelines.
It helps.
We don't always make strikes in bowling, but we have the rails,
It catches it, don't
So we'll knock down at least one pin.
And sometimes parents are ignorant of the true truth.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody came to me yesterday. He's mixed. He's half black, half white, and he's seen a girl. And her parents had met him several times, so they knew that he was mixed. But they came back and the girl told him, "Well, I can't date you anymore because you're black, and the Bible says we're not allowed to date white people can't date black people." And so.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
So he came to the house and he said, "I mean, why can't black and white people date?" I said, "They can." And he said, "Well, she said that the Bible said, her mother and her grandmother both said the Bible said you cannot date black people." And I said, "They're using that you should not be unevenly yoked, and they're misinterpreting
Right.
that. It has nothing to do with your color." I said, "If he meant, he would have said that.
Right.
Don't date black person. Don't
Exactly.
date white, don't date Chinese." And so this girl said, "And I have to honor my mother and my grandmother because they know the Bible and I don't." And so I wanted to call her up and say, "Your parents are incorrect."
Yeah.
But of course I didn't. I told him, I said, it's not going to be a healthy environment for you no matter what." And he said, I'm as much white as I am black. I said, "No matter. They don't want you to date because of your skin color." And so they're just
Yeah.
They were misinformed, and they truly believed that. And this girl was honoring what her mother said, but she didn't want that. She couldn't date a black person because it's in the Bible.
You know what's interesting is that first off that we keep hearing that sort of interpretation of the Bible that is racist, which is bizarre. Like we just read, we all come from Noah. So I mean, you know what I mean? Like, so we're all in the same family, but it's interesting when I teach the Old Testament and the New Testament. When I've taught it in college, I want to spend time to talk about slavery because there have been people in America, especially 150 years ago, more than that, who said, "Okay, here's the Bible passage that tells us we can have slaves," right? Instead of understanding, no, this is the Bible passage about a people that God brought out of slavery and are giving them provision to let their slaves go free. And so for the people who were here 160, 70 years ago, my math is bad on that, they were saying, "Oh, the Bible lets us do that. Here's some of the passages." And they were misinterpreting the passages. And for the most part, we don't interpret those passages that way anymore. because we're better understanding what those passages are actually trying to say. We're not just saying, well, I get to interpret it any way I want to. No, the Bible is true. But we do see here and there some of those lingering interpretations that really lead us off into just craziness.
He said, I'm going to call and tell her that you said it wrong. I said, I told him, I said, you're not going to get through to them.
No.
Because they honestly believe they are serving the Bible. And I said, you don't let people, he said, I'm going to run into this all my life. I said, you are. And I said, do not let people determine you by your color. Let them
Right.
determine your character.
Right.
And I said, when they ask you, and he said, you know, sometimes the girls say black and white. I said, you tell them, ask me about my character.
Right.
Am I a Christian? Am I a good person? Am I a liar? Am I a thief? And so, you know.
And I think he's good proof that, I mean, that there's no clear answer because it doesn't matter, right? I mean, we're all human. We have different physical traits because of the cultures we've lived in and the families that we've grown up around for hundreds of years. But, you know, those cultures mix and,
Done and over that the people would not know. That's not what that means.
yeah.
I think that it,
I think Satan has used a lot of different ways to let Christians say, well, I guess I can interpret it that way, therefore, like, great sin has entered the church. And I think God has been good to weed out a lot of that. So.
It's a lot better than it was.
Oh, yeah.
It gets better.
Yeah, it does.
parents sometimes, they don't know the truth. And they, you know, it's hard for the children to honor them. But then the children have to have an opportunity to say, that's
Yeah.
not what that means. It's not.
And we see a lot of falsehood in church. We see a lot of big temptation for pastors is to say, instead of saying, thus say the Lord, they say, thus say me, you know, and you better listen to me because I'm the pastor. And that's the temptation because that's sin, right? That's us usurping the position to say, I'm in charge now. And
When we say God is no respecter of persons, then we should not be. We should feel the same about people.
yeah, right. We should see everyone equally.
God sees them.
Right, exactly. Equally.
That, then there's not
No better than they are, but no worse either.
That's my favorite thing to say. I'm no better than nobody, and I'm as good as everybody's the same. God loves us all the same, and that's a wonderful thing.
The thing is, if you go back far enough, we're all related anyway.
Right. That's right. All right. Any other thoughts? And what's that?
I'm a Davis, and there's a lot of black Davises.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Black Davises.
That's right.
So is. I think I'm kicked them somewhere down there. Back in the root days.
Well, you are kin. I got news for you. If you go back to Genesis, you are kin to them. So. That's right. I may be kin to Eric somewhere down the road, but I don't have to look like him.
Oh, you know you won't grow up be like me one of these days.
All right. Well, before we chase that rabbit too far down, let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Father, we thank you for your word. Your word is good. It's perfect. It's also living and active. And we want to understand how we can be the best stewards of the truth that is revealed in your word as possible. Help us to wrestle through the things that don't always tickle our ears to read. Help us to worship you and bring all the glory to you, Lord. So we thank you for being good to give us laws and good to give us governments, even though the governments are imperfect. You're good ultimately to give us Jesus, and that you give us a future with Jesus in victory. And it's in the mighty name of Jesus I pray. Amen.